I'm Cherylanne Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 131 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. And today we are talking about uncertainty, how to manage it. In other words, what to do when you just don't know what's next. And that is certainly the environment that we have all been cast into in these most recent weeks. And I think that times like these definitely forge new growth in us. It's like new muscles are getting built for everyone, for all of us. I don't think there's anyone on earth who has dealt with this much change this quickly before. And yet, you may still be feeling like you're doing something wrong if you're struggling. You might be feeling like you should be able to handle this or you should be able to manage it better. And I think what I want to make clear today is just how we as humans process uncertainty and use that to shed some light on why you might be feeling the way you do, okay? Because there's no obvious answer for how to give you more certainty in this environment. But I do want to share some ideas that I think will help you operate within it. Like having an understanding of conceptually how we deal with uncertainty could be really powerful right now. I know it was for me. So first, I would say, know this. Uncertainty is even more stressful than a known negative event. In other words, having uncertainty in your life is more stressful than knowing that something bad is definitely going to happen, right? Like if I told you, you are going to be given a really painful electric shock 60 seconds from now, that would be less stressful than me saying you may or may not get a really painful electric shock 60 seconds from now. The uncertainty itself actually causes tremendous anxiety, okay? So if you can agree that that's true, the question is, why does that happen? Why does that take place? And the answer is because the part of your brain that's wired for survival is constantly sort of scanning your world, scanning your environment, and it's making judgments about what's safe and what isn't, okay? And when it doesn't know what's coming next, it actually registers that as the highest alert. Okay. It's in a way, I was thinking about haunted houses and I was like, this is kind of why haunted houses are so terrifying because you don't know what's around that next corner. If I said around the next corner, this really disgustingly ugly witch is going to jump out at you, you would be like, okay, that's bad. But it's way worse to not know what is coming around that corner. Because if your brain doesn't know what's coming, it can't keep you out of harm's way. Okay. So that creates a really interesting dynamic. The fact that uncertainty is so stressful to our brains means that we have become hardwired to overestimate threats and underestimate our ability to handle them. And it's really all in the name of survival, okay? So when certainty is questioned, when we don't know what's happening next, our stress response goes crazy. And it's really trying to spur you into action and get you to safety. And our brains really want there to be some kind of certainty because we know that if we can just get to certainty, it'll take the edge off the situation, right? Remember what I said, we're actually calmer anticipating that painful shock than we are anticipating uncertainty because the pain is certain. So when we are confronted with uncertainty, our brains do something kind of interesting. They make up stories. The part of our brain that is wired for survival, right, which is called the amygdala, that part of our brain creates stories when we have uncertainty. And here's the kind of stories it creates. It makes up worst case scenario stories, right? It jumps to conclusions about the worst thing that could happen. And then we start believing our own made up stories. We believe them as though they are true, as that we will argue that they are in fact fact-based, that this really is what's going to happen. Now, in psychology, these are called cognitive distortions. We call them cognitive distortions because they're not necessarily based on truth, right? At the very best, they're like a distorted version of truth. Like back to my haunted house, they're like that funhouse mirror that makes you look wiggly, right? But they're stories nonetheless. And our brain doesn't really know the difference between a story and a reality, like a fact. And so our brain can then respond to that story as though it is a reality. And voila, we have certainty. Okay? The problem is that those stories are not necessarily based on truth. The stories are always rooted in survival. And so those worst case scenario stories are like our brain's way of saying, if I can survive that, then I can survive anything. So an example might be in today's environment, the economy is going to collapse. And therefore, I am not going to have a job and I'm not going to be able to find a job. And then I'm going to lose my home and I'm going to be homeless and we're going to run out of food and we'll be living in this. Okay, so we have this catastrophized outcome about the very worst case scenario we can imagine. And then often this is fairly subconscious and we start walking around right now today as if that is an inevitable reality that we are stepping toward. Okay? We're not necessarily making plans to prepare for it. Sometimes we are, but we're more living with the discomfort and the anxiety and the pain around that in our mind has now become an inevitable outcome. Okay? So what do? Well, first thing is acknowledge that we are living in made-up stories because the level of uncertainty about the future is still so significant that any outcome we are predicting is not much more than a made-up story. And so we have to find a way to counteract this uncertainty and start to get ourselves back in truths and not in these fabricated stories or what I was calling before cognitive distortions. So there are two things that are very helpful in aiding you through this process, okay? The first is what you do with your mind, and the second is what you do with your body. So in terms of what you do with your mind, here's the exercise I'm going to give you. The exercise is to go way out into the future and confront your worst case scenario. Just go way out into the future, acknowledge that it's a story you're about to make up, and confront that worst case scenario. Maybe you write it down. Maybe you speak your way through it, like you have a conversation with somebody and you talk to them about what you think is the worst case scenario. And then you use your rational mind to really think through the probabilities of that scenario taking place. And you walk through all of the things that you might do to mitigate that particular scenario from taking place. Okay, so let's use my example before where, the whole story played out and you end up homeless, right? And you're living on the streets with your family and you're homeless, which is a pretty dire scenario. One idea about something you could do to mitigate that situation would be to move your family in with maybe a relative's family. Hey friend, ever wondered why you're so tired all the time? Why you need that afternoon caffeine hit every day just to stay in the game? Hint, you probably need more sleep. So I created something just for you. It's a special guide to help you stop feeling so tired all the time. I'll teach you my best ideas to move from exhausted to energized so you can live out your brilliant dreams. Head to brilliantbalance.net/sleep and get your guide today. You're going to love this. Now, I'm not suggesting that you are going to do that, nor am I suggesting that you're going to be homeless. But I'm, as an example, asking you to think about, okay, if I go all the way out to my worst case scenario, what are some mitigation steps that I might take before it ever came to that? So you're already softening the worst case scenario. Now the worst case scenario is you and your family living with relatives, okay, rather than you and your family living on the streets. And you can keep pulling that story back in a little further and a little further until you realize that that worst case scenario is probably never going to happen. Okay, because you now have a very brief preparedness plan for how you would offset what you had previously thought was the very worst case scenario. Does that make sense? Okay, so the first thing you do with your mind is you go all the way out to the future, you confront your worst case scenario, and then you start thinking through the mitigation plan. What are the steps that you could take before it ever came to that? And once you've kind of done that and grappled with and done battle with that dragon that you have to slay off there in the future, the other thing that's very helpful during these times of extreme uncertainty is to pull your focus all the way back in close and ask yourself, what is the next right thing, right? Here I am today in this moment. You're listening to my voice. What is the next right thing? What is the next thing for you to do where you do have certainty, right? Maybe you need to go for a walk. Maybe you need to decide what you're making for dinner. Maybe you need to go to sleep, right? Maybe you need to pick up the work that's in front of you and do it. But what is the thing that it has enough certainty in the short term for you to know is the next right thing for you to do? And that tactic of going way out and then coming way back in is one way for you to manage your mind in a period of extreme uncertainty. Okay? Now, I told you I was also going to give you something to do with your body. So the thing to do with your body is actually going to help you do the thing with your mind. They're sort of connected. So when you want to be making good short-term decisions and you want to deal well with all of this uncertainty, the best thing that you can do for yourself is to dial up your level of self-care, especially sleep. Now, listen, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but you've probably heard it before and maybe let it wash over you or said blah, blah, whatever, right? I don't have time for that. But I want you to really hear me on this. Sleep, especially sleep, is so critical to your ability to deal with uncertainty. The quantity of sleep you get and the quality of sleep you get is giving you a heightened ability to deal with uncertainty. It increases your ability to think clearly, to process disparate pieces of information simultaneously. Okay? So you're really increasing your capacity to cope with uncertainty when you are getting enough sleep. It has to be paramount during times of extreme uncertainty because the mental burden, or what I'll sometimes call the cognitive load of what you are carrying with all of these variables, is forcing your brain to constantly be trying to solve this multi-part equation. And that's hard work. So being well rested increases your capacity to deal with that, okay? The second thing you can do for your body that helps is exercise. So sleeping well and exercise are the two things that you want to be prioritizing in terms of your own self-care. Because exercise, especially, by the way, the cardio variety, things that get your heart rate up, can improve your capacity to cope with uncertain situations and lowers your stress. So I like to think of this as very moderate cardio exercise. You don't have to be out there, totally breathless. You just need something that at least a moderate level gets your heart rate up a little bit. And that is going to greatly lower your stress level, lower your anxiety level, and increase your ability to manage this level of uncertainty. Okay, so the two things, sleep and exercise, are critical physical practices that you want to protect for. And I'll just remind you, your brain solves problems overnight. Your subconscious will solve problems for you literally while you sleep. So you need to let your brain do its work. You need to let it turn off all the new stimulus that's been coming at it all day and process and sort things and make connections for you so that when you wake up in the morning refreshed, you have access to those new pathways. The new solutions are going to be visible to you. The people I know who are navigating this moment in time with the most grace, the most agility, the most strength are the people who are paying attention to their sleep and to their exercise. And that can be you too. Okay? So just to recap a couple things we talked about today, uncertainty is very stressful, period. In fact, it's even more stressful than a known negative event, right? It's more stressful than knowing something bad is definitely going to happen. And because of that, because our brains hate uncertainty so much, they make up stories. They make up stories about what is going to happen to serve as a proxy for certainty, right? Even a made-up story is better than not knowing what's going to happen. But those stories are almost always worst-case scenario stories because our brains are trying to protect us, okay? So when we're confronted with the uncertainty, our brains make up stories, but they're almost always worst-case scenario stories, which isn't very helpful. So to counteract that uncertainty, we have a couple of things we have to do. With our minds, we have to learn to go way out into the future and confront the worst case scenario. And then we can come way back in to the present moment and ask ourselves, what's the next right thing? And 2 physical practices that will help you do this are getting good quality sleep and enough of it and exercising regularly. Okay, so if you're struggling with uncertainty right now, and most of us are, and you want some immediate relief, today's episode should help you. Okay, if you want more support, drop me a line. That is exactly what I am here for. And we are walking so many women in our community through this period of uncertainty. And I am so proud of how well they are using the tools that we're giving them to manage their minds well, to manage their careers well, to manage their families well, and to take good care of themselves. So if you know that you could use some extra support during this time and you want to navigate this period well so you come out the other side ready to play, right? You come out the other side strong and well positioned for whatever we're walking into, get in touch. And there's a couple of ways to do that. You can find me on Instagram. I'm at C. Skolnicki, and you can direct message me there. That's an easy way to reach me. You can direct message me on Facebook. Cherylanne Skolnicki is our page, and you can direct message me through that. You can respond to any of the emails that you get from me, or you can comment on the podcast. So any of those ways of getting in touch, I would love to hear from you, and we would absolutely be happy to give you some extra support during this time. Make sure you're in the Brilliant Balance Facebook group. That's a great place to connect with a lot of other women who are on this journey together. So much good support happening inside of that group right now, and I would love you to be a part of it. Till next time, my friends, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.